Happy Monday, everybody. I guess I'm going to project my voice today. Don't be afraid to come a little bit closer. I'm not going to kill anybody, at least not in public. I think everybody here knows I'm Bob Laramie from the Computer Science Department. Well, if you didn't know that, that's who I am. And we're going to talk about reading research papers today. And in particular, reading lots of research papers. So who here has read a research paper before? Good. Who here has struggled with reading a research paper before? Who here has struggled with managing the complexity inside of an individual research paper? Who has struggled with the massive volume of previously published research papers? Anybody working on a literature survey? Anybody? Okay, good. So we're going to talk about all those questions and maybe some of the answers to all those questions today. That's what we're going to talk about today. Reading research papers and doing it in a systematic and logical and kind of accelerated way by focusing on what the most important information contained in the research paper is. Because research papers are very complicated, they contain a massive amount of information, but not all of it is important, or it varies in its importance. And the idea behind this seminar is, especially if you have to get through a lot of research papers, to do things like a literature survey and finding solved and unsolved problems to work on. That's kind of what we're talking about today. Yeah. If anybody has questions or comments in the middle, interrupt me at any time. Yeah. You guys are from which department back there? Geography? Geography. Okay. Which department?
Physics.
Physics. Okay. Computer science. Bioscience? Computer science. Okay, good. This is a great topic. I love this topic, by the way. And it's not commonly taught. This is not something you can go to any university for and find out about. This is kind of an unusual lecture, I would say. In fact, I've never seen this lecture anywhere else by anyone else, ever. This is it. And I remember when I was a master's student, I had friends that were smarter than me writing PhDs at the time, and I was thinking about it, should I try for a PhD or should I not try for a PhD? And one of my friends, his name is Phil Rhodes, who I still hope is friends with me today. I remember he had a huge stack of research papers on his desk. He printed a bunch, as he did his literature review, and he would put them in a nice stack. You probably have seen people that do that, print them out and put them in big stacks. And I always wondered, how is it possible to manage that? How is that? That seems impossible. How can you manage hundreds of research papers and make any sense out of it? So that's kind of an inspiration behind today's subject. So the goal, the overarching goal that's motivating this whole process is to determine solved and unsolved problems in science. That's what we're trying to do, because we don't want to work necessarily on solved problems. You might have to work on some solved problems to get to the unsolved aspects, but ultimately the goal is to identify solved problems and unsolved problems. That's the goal that motivates all this. And we all know, everybody in this room knows, that a single research paper has a lot of information in it and a lot of complexity. Sometimes it's written by a team of 10 authors, maybe more. some of those authors have like 20 years of experience. Some of them might only have 2 or 3 years of experience, but like some of them are probably going to have 10 to 20 or 30 years of experience. And you don't know how many collective years of experience went into that paper. But it's very common for 3 or 4 years of collective experience to go into a single research paper if you consider the whole team. All the time, the whole team, the whole co-author, let's put into a paper. So there's a lot of complexity and intelligence and dedication to every single paper, which makes it difficult, you know, if you're trying to find solved and unsolved problems. It's difficult. And the other challenge is the sheer volume. There's so much previous literature, and that problem is not going away anytime soon. It's only getting worse with time. So this is one of the top challenges in any field, is to keep up with the previously published literature. And the central question is, are there any techniques, strategies for keeping up and managing this complexity? And the answer is yes. We're going to look at one of them today. This is not the only strategy, but this is one of them. And just here's a little bit of overview of what we're actually going to talk about. There are related pieces of work in this area. We're going to talk about distant versus close reading, concept versus implementation, and then we're going to get down to the actual process of extracting the essentials from a scientific research paper. And we're going to look at some examples from computer science, physics. Are there any mathematicians in here? We'll skip that example if there are none. Bioscience, yes, right? And geography, yes. So I have one from each department, but I always reserve the right to skip one if there are nobody from that department here. And hopefully we'll have time to talk about breadth versus depth. So the idea is based on the assumption that not all of the information in a research paper is of equal importance. When you pick it up, there's some bits you need to get and some bits you don't, like you can leave. That's the idea. Now, this is really kind of step one-ish of writing a literature survey. So this lecture is kind of targeted to the person who's writing a literature survey. And literature surveys are part of every thesis, right? And they're really supposed to say, oh, I've done my homework, I know what the solved problems are, and therefore I'm not going to work on a solved problem by accident, only to discover that, you know, a year later I'm working on a problem that's already been solved, right? Has anybody ever done that? Worked for a little while on a solved problem only to discover that it was solved a year later? I've done that. Nobody's ever done that? That's good. If you've never had that happen to you, congratulations. Like, that's good news. Because it's an interesting experience. And so surveys are good at obtaining overviews of literature and finding unsolved problems. And I've worked on a lot of surveys before. I'll just briefly mention some related work on this kind of topic. So if you Google like how to write a survey paper, there are publications on how to write a survey paper. They exist and they're out there. This is a little bit different in that it's focusing on a systematic methodology to extract the essential information from a single research paper. There are papers that describe how to read a scientific research paper in order to write a review. Probably you're not at that stage yet. Does anybody here review scientific research papers? Okay, so and that's another process. Like somebody submits it to a conference in a journal, and it's your job to accept it or reject it or request modifications and so on. That's later on. And there are papers that are published that say, here's how to get your paper rejected. Here are all the ways papers get rejected. That's a an interesting topic as well. Okay, so let's talk about close versus distant reading. Anybody heard these terms yet or before? Good. So today you've heard them for the first time. Now, close reading is what you all do by default. You pick up something, you read the first word, then you read the second word, then you read the third word, and you repeat until you get to the last word. That can also be called close reading. It's like you are up close. The analogy is you are up close. But imagine you could increase the distance away from the paper. You wouldn't be able to read the text anymore, but you might be able to see something else. Like what might you be able to see if you just held it further away, like 2 or 3 meters away? Any ideas? Pictures, exactly. You'd be able to see the images and the figures, maybe, probably, depending on how far it is. So distant reading is generating a representation, a visual representation of what's inside the text based on metadata. So extracting metadata from the text and then saying, okay, this research paper has the following characteristics, and here's how we represent them visually. So you just see an image, and that image tells you something about the papers you're looking at, or the paper you're looking at. This is an example. This is a distant reading. Each one of these polygons represents a single research paper. And those polygons have different shapes and they have different colors. And those shapes and the colors represent different properties of each one of the papers. Right? So the shapes represent the subjects, different subject fields, and then the colors represent different types of data that are being studied in the scientific research papers. And you might notice there's something else going on. It's hard for you to see because you're sitting far away. They have lines between them, edges, so they're related to each other. These are in a hierarchy. They're all in hierarchies except for these. That means like this one was published before this one. So all of these cite this one. And this paper cites this one, and so on. So there's like a citation hierarchy being depicted there. That's an example of distant reading. It's very distant. It's taking a collection of 25 research papers, or however many that is, and then generating a single image to give you like some quick cue. What we're going to talk about today is something kind of in between close and distant reading. It's not close reading necessarily, but it's not distance reading either. It's like meso reading, like something in between close and distant reading. It looks like this is something in between. You know, this is a distant reading view of some text. This is the close reading view, and it's being compared to another text, a translation. Here's the translation distant view, and there's the translated close-up view. It's sort of like this. So now we have the idea of close versus distant reading. Everybody think they understand that? Did that make some sense? Any questions about that? The next important piece of background is concept versus implementation. This is very important. Probably more important than the close versus distant reading. The close versus distant reading, if you didn't understand it, it's not absolutely essential, actually. It helps, but it's not essential. Concept versus implementation is very, very essential. And I still remember when my master's thesis advisor taught me this. It was like a bulb, going off in my head, like, oh my gosh, I wish I had known this before. Like, this is nice, So a concept is a general notion or idea, a conception, using the word and the definition. An idea of something formed by mentally combining all its characteristics or particulars, a construct. A directly conceived or intuited object of thought. So a concept is a little bit abstract. It's something that exists more in your imagination than in reality. Implementation, the act of accomplishing some aim or executing some order. If these are just dictionary definitions, by the way, it's always good if you're describing some terminology to look, what does the dictionary have to say about these words? But I will explain them in normal, plain English as we go along. The act of implementing, providing a practical means for accomplishing something, carrying into effect. That's the idea behind implementation. But in short, simple terms, a concept is an idea, and the implementation is the realization of that idea into reality. So the concept is imaginary, and then the implementation is real. It's a physical object or a physical presence, like something has gone from the world of the imaginary into reality. That's the difference between concept and implementation. So a concept is an idea or a thought. It's not something that is with mass. It's in your head. An implementation is the realization or the bringing into reality of a concept. So a concept usually starts out as an idea in somebody's head. Somebody says, oh, I have this great idea. And then it's up to somebody to make it a reality. That's the to implement the idea. The concept is often in science, it's formulated as a hypothesis. This is often how a concept represents itself in science, in your fields. Like, I have a hypothesis that, deep sea behavior looks like this, after 10 hours or something like this. That's a concept. And then a concept is implemented. As soon as you write down the concept, it brings it a little bit closer to reality. Right? As soon as you write it down as a hypothesis, it's like a little bit closer to reality. And then you start to communicate it with people. This is not a very exciting example, but it just is there to make it very crystal clear what I'm talking about. A writing utensil. A writing utensil is a concept. Like, I have this idea of some sort of a tool used to write things down and therefore communicate with other people. I call it a writing utensil. Yeah, you can look up the idea in a dictionary. It's an idea. It's a concept. How do I implement a writing utensil? Well, in this example, one of the implementations is a pencil. So it's a tool that you can use to write things down and communicate with other people, but it has a physical representation. It's made of wood and lead, whatever that chalk is in the middle. That's the implementation of a writing utensil. It's one example. It's very exciting. I can see from your faces like, wow, that's an exciting example. It is, right? But I'm just trying to make it clear in your heads that you know the difference between concept versus implementation. Does everybody think they understand that? Because that is the essential aspect to all scientific research papers. Extracting the concept. Now, furthermore, with a pencil, graphite is used to write down on a piece of paper. That's the implementation of a writing utensil. For a known concept, there are an infinite number of implementations. So there are other implementations of writing utensil, markers, pens, blood, like chalk. Every pencil is different, right? There are no two pencils that are exactly the same. Every pen is slightly different. So you have one concept, writing utensil, but guess what? There are an infinite number of implementations of that concept. That's another important idea that is pertinent to the scientific literature search. So there's an unlimited variety of implementations, and that's a good thing to know for scientific literature as well, when you're trying to figure out a scientific research paper. So these are the essentials of a scientific research paper. These are the things that you want to look for when you're reading a scientific research paper, instead of what you might do already, which is just, oh, I'm going to start with word number 1, I'm going to read it, then I'm going to read word number 2, word number 3, and repeat until I get to the end. That's like the old process. This is a new process for reading, which does not involve reading every single word. It involves searching for the essential components that you need to take away from the paper. The first one is the concept. The concept behind the research paper. And that is formulated usually as a hypothesis and a contribution. Like, what is the contribution this scientific piece of paper, or this scientific research paper, makes to science? What's the concept? What is their contribution? What is their hypothesis? What is new? That's another way of saying, what's new here? What is new that this paper has that all the other ones don't? That's the concept. The implementation is separate from the concept, by the way. So now you make this distinction of concept is one thing, and implementation is a different thing. So you can have a research paper with one concept. You can have another research paper with the same concept, but a different implementation. They're all going to have different implementations, actually. Every research paper is going to have a different implementation, actually. So how do the authors support their hypothesis? That's also associated with the implementation. What experiment do they carry out in order to support their hypothesis? How do they implement the concept? You know, what is it? Do they build software? Do they use special hardware? Those are two very important things to extract from the research paper. And then there are some other things. The related work. What is the most important piece of related work to this one that I'm reading? Usually there's one predecessor, or maybe two preceding research papers that are the most important. You know, there'll be like 30 papers, or 40 papers, or 50 papers cited, but usually there are one or two that are the most important. And that's good information to extract from any research paper. And I've got this other section called data characteristics. This is formulated in a little bit of maybe a computer science way, but for any discipline or any topic that involves data, you want to extract the characteristics of that data. So some people don't study data, they're studying a complex process. You might want to write down the characteristics of a complex process, but a lot of the research we do has data involved. And then you want to write down the characteristics of the data that is involved in that research paper. That's one of the essential attributes. Is it spatial data? If it is, what's the spatial dimensionality of the data? Is it time dependent? Does it involve a time component? What size is it? What resolution is it? Very important information. Is it multi-resolution or adaptive resolution? It's okay if those terms don't make any sense. They'll make sense to some people. Is it structured or unstructured? Is it scalar data? Is it vector data, tensor data, or abstract data? Is it multivariate data? So for a lot of you, the answers will be yes to some of these questions. So you write down, what are the characteristics of the data that's used in that research paper? Is everybody still with me? Who is doing something with data? Yeah. Most people are, I think. If you're not doing anything with data, then you're studying a process. It's got to be one or the other. You can't avoid studying both processes and data. I don't think. Has anybody managed to not study any process or any data? If so, I want to know how that works. I guess thought experiments. No, that's a process. That's a process. Anyways. So there it is. You can set up literally a template. This is the systematic extraction of the essentials of a research paper. You can literally set up a template that looks like this. You can adapt it to your needs, your specific discipline, your specific ideas, your specific essentials, but it looks like this. This is what it looks like. You want to extract the concept of a scientific research paper, the implementation, also called the method, by the way. Some of you won't use the word implementation, you'll use the word experiment or method. That's the same. Those are all synonymous in this context. You'll want to extract the essential related work, the essential data characteristics of the scientific research paper. And there are some other things you could add on to there, depending on the discussions you have, for example, with your supervisor, what your supervisor thinks is an essential aspect, and depending on the kind of survey paper you might be interested in writing. You don't have to write this down, take a photo if you don't want. The slides are on the Doctoral Training Center. You can take a photo, obviously, but slides are on the Doctoral Training Center's seminar webpage. So I'm going to talk about these other ones, like analysis techniques, application domain, maybe an image, a sample image from the paper. Because in computer science, we usually type the summaries up for our survey papers. And it's nice to have a sample image that represents the paper, one figure. That just helps you jog your memory. So I know you're dying of suspense and anticipation right now. You just want to see examples. What does this actually look like in action? Yeah. I'm also psychic, by the way. I can read minds. I like being psychic. I really enjoy it. Here's an example. This one's from computer science. We're going to touch the other subjects, but since I'm a computer scientist, I always start with the computer science stuff. This is a paper. Now, you're not going to understand it if you're not a computer scientist. Even if you're a computer scientist, it's hard to understand. It just happens to be a very highly cited paper, and it's an example. So the title I've written down the essentials on one slide. So I've summarized the essential information I need to know about this paper is on this slide. I've extracted it. So the concept is a faster version of a previous algorithm. So they have an existing algorithm and they say, we think we can do it faster. That's the concept. Faster version of a previous algorithm. Very simple, actually. That's often the case, though. When you read a scientific research paper, there are two very common concepts. One is we can do something somebody else did faster. We've discovered a way to get the job done faster. Or we've discovered a way to get the job done quicker. Or we've discovered a way to get the previous job done more accurately. If you look in the scientific research paper, most of the contributions fall in those three categories. Quicker, more accurate, or faster than previous. Like, it would be fun to see, okay, what percentage of all scientific research contributions fit into those three categories. But it would be a very big percentage, I think. I don't know what the percentage would be, maybe like 50%. And I've written 2 sentences about the implementation, just 2 sentences. They achieve this by reducing the number of redundant streamlined computations. That doesn't have to make sense to you guys. But what you do want to notice is the implementation is reduced to 2 sentences, which is very concise and easy. A scientific research paper consists mostly, if you count the pages, most of the pages are dedicated to the implementation. Here's how we conducted our experiments. So you have an abstract introduction, you have a related work section, and then you have 10 to 20 pages of how we did it, how we supported this hypothesis. That is something you can kind of throw away now. You just need the basic idea of the implementation. This is the key realization, and this is where the key complexity comes in. The scientific research papers are very complicated because of the implementation that they describe. For some people, that's going to be called the method. It's a process or an experiment. The details of how they set up and conducted an experiment or a method or a process or an implementation, that's not very important. So 80% of the scientific research paper is not going to be very important because it's dedicated to the implementation. And you don't need to know all of the details of the implementation. You don't need to know that. You just don't. What you need to know is the concept. That's the essential. Where do you find the concept? Anybody know? Anybody want to guess?
Abstract.
In the abstract. Exactly. In the abstract or the introduction. So you read the abstract, maybe, and maybe the introduction. Maybe you don't even have to read the introduction. The introduction is usually like a little bit more verbose in terms of explaining the contribution. So I usually read the introduction too. Then you get your concept. The implementation, I will look at the method section and just skim through like the different steps that are usually labeled as sections and subsections. But just a high-level summary, okay, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. That's my implementation, 2 sentences. I will look in a related work section to see there is exactly 1 scientific research paper that this accelerates. The related work section contains 30 citations, but there's 1 that's the most important. And then I've written down the data characteristics, and I've put a sample image. This is the essentials of that paper, boiled down to a very manageable chunk of information, very manageable. Now that's using that template that I mentioned, like the 4 parts of the template. We could add some other things if you want to, depending on what you want to get out, depending on what you're studying. You can take that basic template and modify it and customize it based on basically discussions with your supervisor, basically. You could, for example, extract analysis techniques. What analysis techniques did the authors use? Right? Did they use examples, statistics, visualization software tools? What application is involved? Right? Maybe you're the scientific paper involves applications to physics or earth sciences or astronomy or chemistry and biology. That's if you are doing something that could be multidisciplinary. Any questions so far? Here's another example. This one is a little bit longer. It's another computer science paper. Don't worry, I am going to do other ones. This is called the Marching Cubes algorithm, a high-resolution 3D isosurface construction algorithm. That's a sample image in the paper. The concept, a novel algorithm for construction of large isosurfaces. So again, it's somebody did this already, but now we're going to do it faster than the previous people. That's the concept, basically. Faster and make the process also easier and simpler. The basic implementation consists of the following steps. Then I just write down 6 steps. That's the summary of the implementation. If you look at the paper, 80% of the paper is dedicated to the implementation again. But I've just taken those subsection headings and I've written down the steps in the overview. A good scientific research paper will have an overview of the implementation or the method or the experiment before they jump into the details. That's where you can extract the implementation. However, there are many bad scientific research papers that don't have an overview at all. So you have to skim through and get the basic implementation out. There's a related work section, but in this example, there's exactly one paper that's the most important previous paper. I've written down the data characteristics there, and I've added 2 more points like analysis techniques, volume visualization, isosurface rendering. In the application domain, it's a computer science paper, but it applies to domains outside of computer science. So they've used this method to visualize medical data from an MRI scan or CT scan. Questions or comments? Now, I admit, like, this started out as a computer science project, let's say, this idea that we're looking at right now. And I was very curious. I'm a computer scientist. I was very curious, okay, is this template, is this methodology going to work on the other subjects? Can I just apply this to physics, start applying it to physics papers, bioscience papers, geography papers, mathematics papers? Am I going to be able to do that? I remember, like, shaking. No, but I remember really wondering, wow, am I going to just be able to pick up any scientific research paper and apply this? The answer is obviously yes. Now, I'm not going to do it as good as a physicist will do it, but I can, as a computer scientist, pick up a physics paper and apply this template. And I could write a survey paper. It wouldn't be as good as a physicist, but I could do it. So here's an example from physics. Who are the physics people? There were some physics people. Have you guys ever heard of that paper before? Seen that paper? This is, I just was trying to think, like, oh, what examples should I use from physics? Like, any guesses? Like, if you had to do this and had to pick an example from physics, any guesses what you would pick? Any idea? I searched for the top cited physics papers. So this is the most cited physics paper, period. Like, this is it. This is the most popular physics research paper in the world. Done. Like, that's why I asked you guys. So you guys should really know about this. Like, it happens to be a survey paper. So this is the title, Review of Particle Physics. There are 129 co-authors. And it was published, at least the last time I checked it, maybe it's outdated by now, but it was published in 2012. The concept, it is a literature review paper of particle physics. It's a reference for all known measured particles and for hypothetical particles. Good? I mean, I just had to read the abstract and the introduction, and I can see what that is. But I'm not a physicist. The implementation, well, what do? They're looking at huge volumes of previously published papers and extracting the essential information about each subatomic particle. So they have summarized metadata for 2,658 particles from 644 papers. They list, evaluate, and average measured properties of these different subatomic particles that I don't really know about. But I don't need to. This thing, did I write down how many pages it is? No, I didn't. But this thing is very, very long. It's a huge, I don't know, I can't remember actually. I'm going to say hundreds of pages. But I don't have to worry about that now that I know this technique. If I was a student and somebody said, check out this paper, and I started to read it from back, like word number 1 to word number, the last word, I would start to feel like suicidal probably, like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die, like I'm really gonna die. Well, not anymore. Now you can relax, and this is the essential information I need. I wrote down the data characteristics. I wrote down the previous related work, which is the same version, previous versions of the same survey. So they publish this survey every 10 years or something, and they renew it. So there's a long history to it. They have 30K measurements, over 30K measurements. Their analysis technique is an extensive literature search. This is a reference document for particle physics. And just for the fun of it, I just added like other information. I like it, if a paper has a URL, like an associated URL, I like to put that down. Supplementary material. And, oh look, no interesting images. So I couldn't find an interesting image in the...
Is that right? 1,526 pages.
Is that what I have? Oh yeah, okay, so I did. I wrote down the number of pages. Imagine, your supervisor tells you, can you please read that? And then you actually try to read it. That would be horrible. But this is how big it is, so I did write down the number of pages. So no interesting images. Yeah, well, I guess it's hard to take an image of a subatomic particle. Okay, no mathematicians here, so we can skip that one. How about bioscience? Is it back there? Or be here, bioscience. Are you guys in the marine bioscience? This is like this is not marine wildlife bioscience. This is really, I would call this chemistry. It's more like chemistry. Anybody ever seen this paper before or heard of it? This is, you've seen this before? Good. This is one of the most highly cited ever bioscience papers. That's why I picked it. I just have, I have to pick one. So which one am I going to pick? I may as well. What I was trying to do is find like the famous papers from the other fields, the classic ones to look at. So let's see, can I apply? I'm not a bioscientist, not even close. I'm not a physicist, and I was curious, like, is this going to work? If I just pick up a bioscience paper, is this going to work? So the title is called Protein Measurement with the Folin Phenyl Reagent. And it's a very famous paper, and there are articles from authors, including this one, about like why it's so famous, and nobody knows exactly like why it's so famous, but it just happens to be most cited article in bioscience. So the concept, procedures are described for the detection and measurement of protein using the phenol reagent. Sometimes even very small amounts of protein are discovered for protein. So that's it. It's really simple. The concept actually is pretty simple. They're just looking. It's a search process. It's a search process. That's all it is. They're conducting experiments to search for something, and then they find it. Right? The detection and measurement of a protein. That's it. And I'm not a bioscientist, but I know what their contribution is. I've got it from reading the abstract and reading the introduction. Now the really scary part is the implementation. I'm never going to follow that, you know. But that's true about computer science papers too. Like, you can spend years of your life trying to understand the full details of the implementation, but you're wasting your time. It's a waste of time, actually. But I wrote down like a summary of the implementation. The conditions under which and phenol can be used to detect protein are varied with respect to pH, acidity, reaction time, concentration of reactants, and substances that may interfere with the detection. So they're playing with a lot of different parameters in their experiments to see if they can discover this protein. Now, one of the pains with this paper is there's no related work section. Do you guys usually find a related work section in your papers? So, okay, biosciences is not that way. So your citations are just scattered all over the place. Okay, I'm sorry for you gues. You know. But, okay, they're mixed in the introduction. I think in most of the other scientific fields, there's a special section called related work, where you find it all summarized and concentrated, pun intended. But okay, in the biosciences, it's scattered. So that part's a little bit more difficult in the biosciences, identifying the most important previously published paper. So I had to do a little bit more digging to find that this one and this one are the two most important previous ones. Because I had to really like skim, oh my gosh, there's no related work section. The data characteristics, so they listed a lot of these substances that they used as sample reagents to detect proteins. So those are the data characteristics used in this context. I put a sample figure in there. That's one of the graphs that it's a very confusing graph actually. It's got pH on one y-axis, the second, so that's the reaction time, and the percentage of the maximum concentrate on another y-axis. So this is for biochemical purposes. I guess you're all excited to see the geography example. But the thing is with geography, it's split up into these different, like physical geography, people-centered geography, and all that stuff. So this is, I don't know why I'm not into geography, but this is one of the most highly cited geography papers of all time. Has anybody seen it in the geography? This one, I would call this more like political geography, which I guess would be in the people-centered geography category rather than the physical, I think. I'm not a geography expert, so. But I can apply this template. The concept, political geography, so it even says it here. Political geography is usually divided by 2D surface area. So a flat surface with straight line boundaries. The author's hypothesis is that the territory is more complex than merely area. The author investigates the inclusion of depth with an emphasis on tunnels. We need to consider volume or 3D, not just area, when creating boundaries or divisions between political areas. So that's the concept. Then the implementation, this is very different than a classic science experiment where we're writing a software or running an experiment or trying to figure out what some animal behavior is. This one is basically case by case study. So he's accumulating a bunch of examples to support his hypothesis, a bunch of instances. It's not a classic experiment that we usually think of, at least usually I think of. The author supports his view using examples and case studies as opposed to data or process analysis. An old border between Israeli and Jordan, the Atlantic wall built during the Dutch, Belgian, and French coast by Germany and the US-Mexican border. So he's just looking at these different problem areas around the world to support his hypothesis. This one is a pain too, like there's no related work section. Do you guys usually find a related work section? No? Who are you guys? So in the computer science, mathematics, and physics, I believe there's almost always a related work section. At least, if it's a good paper, it should have a related work section, like a special section, really. So no related work section, it's mostly in the introduction, which is what somebody here said already. And I identified one previous paper that uses the word volumetric to this idea of volumetric territory. And the characteristics that keep appearing over and over again are walls, buildings, tunnels, and other structures. There's no special analysis technique, it's by example. And this is for political geography. And I took an image from the paper and I put it in there so I can remember what that paper is. Helps me remember these images. Any questions about that?
So is the rationale behind the paper, is that kind of part of the concept? So I always find that kind of rationale is the first thing I look for in a paper. Why should I care about it?
The motivation, yes, that's what you mean, right? The motivation.
Yeah, essentially.
Yes, definitely, definitely. But that's not really part of the template, though, the motivation. But it's a good thing to extract. You could add that to the template if you wanted to. I guess the reason it's not part of this template is because the motivation appears over and over again. You know, the motivation will be redundant when you have a large set of research papers that are all studying the same topic. You see the motivation coming up over and over again, the same one. But you could add it to the template if you thought it helped you and you wanted to. If I'm studying computer science, though, if I go back and look at the computer science examples, and I'm a computer scientist, I know what the motivation is, just based on the essential information. To get something to work faster, to be something to be more accurate, you know, and those sorts of things. Okay, this is probably, how's the time? Probably we're running out. This is just like a fun little hard to see slide that is the construction of a survey paper. It's taking a bunch of papers that are related to each other and starting to work on a survey using this template. So it's a template, that pattern that appears over and over again, and then you get the papers that you want in the different sections, and then you turn it into natural language text without the template. That's one of the later stages. And one last little mind-reading exercise. Some of you are thinking, I think, at least those are the waves I'm getting, the signals from the universe. Some of you are thinking, but Bob, aren't there times when you do have to understand the implementation? Is anybody thinking that? Because I got that signal. Isn't there a time when you really do need to understand the method or the experiment and all that stuff? That's what this slide is about. So if you're a PhD candidate or a master's candidate, the first thing you're set out to do is find the solved and unsolved problems. And that's what we're doing here. We're using this process to accelerate our reading process of previous research papers to find the solved and unsolved problems. And by the way, that's a skill. What we're talking about today is a skill, and it evolves with practice. At first it might be difficult. At first it might take you 2 hours to extract the essentials from a research paper. But the more you practice, the faster it gets. And then when you're like really experienced, it takes me 15 minutes, for example, so I can get the essentials out. If it's a computer science paper, I can get the essentials out really fast, like 5 to 10 minutes, 5 minutes sometimes. So it's very fast. But it gets better and better with practice. So and that's the time, 5 to 15 minutes, is much shorter than the old close reading process of starting with the first word and then ending with the last word. That takes an hour or 2 hours or longer, right? Depending on how much you actually want to understand. But you can spend days studying a paper to understand everything. So the depth phase follows the breadth phase. The phase that you start with is breadth. You're trying to cover a lot of breadth at the beginning, a lot of area, a lot of scientific literature at the beginning. That's the breadth phase. Once you've identified an unsolved problem and you say, okay, I want to propose a solution to this specific problem, that's going to be my thesis topic, then you might have to go back and find those research papers that are related exactly to the problem you're working on and look at the implementation in some more detail, maybe. But only 1 or 2, not hundreds. Right? So that's the idea. Don't forget that sometimes, or oftentimes, a scientific research paper does not have all the information you need to reproduce the results. Actually, that's true the majority of the time. There are things like space limitations. You can't include all the details. People just forget to include things that are important. This is about reproducibility. It's a big, big topic. It's a big topic in all of science, like reproducible science, because we're supposed to be doing reproducible science. But actually, a lot of the scientific papers don't have all the details you need to reproduce the results. You can actually, if you notice that there are details missing, you can always contact the authors and say, I have this question. That is possible. A lot of PhD students don't know that that's possible. Has anybody here ever written to an author of a research paper before and asked a question? Well done, well done. I used to do it all the time as a student, all the time. But I discovered when I came here that most people don't do that. But you can do that. You can just say, I don't understand this. Please, can you help clarify? And they'll reply. If they're still alive and their email address still works, they will reply and say, thank you for reading my paper. I'd be happy to answer your questions. That's usually the response. That's always the response I got. And then I met them. I would meet them at a conference. Be like, oh my gosh, you're the guy I wrote to. So another thing to keep in mind is a good research direction is very difficult to determine if you only look at one research paper. That's just, you need to look at 50 to 100 research papers to decide Is what I want to do the right thing to do? Am I really working on an unsolved problem? You need that. That's why surveys are so good. And before you write a survey, don't forget to check for existing surveys on your topic. Yeah, that already exists. Any questions or comments? That's just a little summary. And there are references here, if anybody's interested to see the details of the papers that we talked about in this lecture, and so on. By the way, if you want to see this lecture in written form, written published form, like a scientific research paper, it exists. It's called How to Read a Visualization Research Paper Extracting the Essentials. It is a computer science paper, but if you want to see this lecture in a written format, you can download this as a PDF, and it will help you. Like, you can apply this process to physics, geography, bioscience, mathematics, even though we skipped the mathematics example. It applies. So, any questions or comments? Everybody's like really, really excited. Like, wow, I cannot believe how much time I'm going to save now. I feel such a sense of relief. I know, I can now give you a stack of 100 papers. I can give you a stack of 100 papers and you can get through them. Not in a day, but you can do it. You can get through them, find the unsolved problems, put them in related groups with each other, extract the essentials. You can do it now. Question?
That is actually very, very useful information because I'm doing just that. I'm reading word papers, but are there any good strategies to find the most relevant literature, for example, the most recent, or especially the most recent, because some surveys maybe list older research papers, but the most recent papers may be hard to find. Good.
I have an answer that you're going to hate and like at the same time. The good news is I do have an answer for you. The bad news is that's the next lecture. That's that topic. So the next literature is about the survey, like how to put together a survey. And then we talk about searching for literature, how to do your literature search, and those sorts of things. So it's a bittersweet answer, isn't it? Okay, I'll make it a little bit sweeter. If you want to skip ahead and look at that lecture, you can. I already have it recorded from last time on the YouTube playlist. There's a YouTube playlist if you got an email. Well, if you search for this lecture on YouTube, you can find the email playlist, and there's a pointer to it. Are you on the Blackboard module?
I haven't actually received your email.
Okay.
It's done it as well, anyways. Quite easy to find.
Yeah, it's on YouTube. It's on YouTube. It's called like How to Conduct a Scientific Literature Survey. It's the next one. So.
Do you know when that will be? The next lecture.
That's it. Now I'm glad you asked that. When would you guys like it to be? Do you want me to do another one in December? Or do you want me to wait until next year? What would you like? Anybody have an opinion? I could do another one in like 2 weeks, or I could just wait until January or February or something.
After December then?
Yeah, like so one in December, like in two-ish weeks or something. Yeah, that would be fine. That would be fun. The only thing is though, we are alternating between the Bay and the Singleton campus, so it'll probably be on the Bay campus. But I will record it. Would anybody here go to the Bay campus for a lecture? Yeah? You have to say yes. But yeah. So there are some people that came from the Bay campus to here today, including me. So it is possible. Even though it takes 3 hours. But thank you all. Thank you.
Just a question. You were saying once you've worked through your frameworks, you've extracted this essential information from your paper, and then you said you turned it into just like plain text.
Yep.
Would you then store that for future reference? Do you use you put that into a file in your reference manager, or how do you do that?
That's up to you. Like, you could have, for example, a single side of A4. You definitely should not be exceeding a single side of A4 paper, by the way, when you're doing this. I would say half of a side of A4. A4 is the standard size. I get A3 and A4 confused for some reason. I don't know why. It's a little bit cuckoo. But yeah, so it's really, you imagine a half of a page of A4. You could store all of your summaries on half pages of A4 paper if you wanted to. That would be an approach. But what we do in our group is we then turn them into a literature survey document that is chapter 2 of your thesis. So chapter 2 of your thesis is literature review. So that's what we do. And that again overlaps with the next lecture. It's like about the scientific literature, survey, construction, things like that. Any other questions? Enthusiastic audience, good, good. Happy Monday.